My name is May Brown. I'm 29 years old, and for 3 years, I paid my parents' mortgage in complete silence while they told everyone I was selfish. I didn't wake up one morning and realize my family was lying about me. It happened slowly, quietly, in pieces small enough to ignore until they weren't. From the outside, my family looked fine, respectable, the kind of family people assume is close because they smile in photos and sit together at holidays. My parents like to present us as tight-knit, even when that closeness only ever seemed to apply to one person. My younger brother Ethan is 26. He's married to his high school sweetheart Lauren, and they have 2 kids, 3 and 1. According to my mother, Ethan did everything right. Married young, had kids early, built what she loved to call a real family. Me? I was the daughter who chose work over love. I'd always been different, quieter, more focused. I liked books and numbers and systems that made sense. Ethan liked sports, attention, and being liked. Growing up, that difference mattered more than I realized at the time. When Ethan made varsity basketball as a freshman, my parents threw him a party. Balloons, cake, relatives invited over to celebrate his talent. When I got accepted into the state honors program for math and science, my mom smiled distractedly and said, "That's nice, honey," before going back to planning Ethan's birthday, 3 months away. I learned early what earned praise in our house. After high school, I worked my way through college on a full academic scholarship, juggling part-time jobs and internships. I graduated with honors in computer engineering and landed a solid tech job right out of school. It didn't make me interesting to my parents, but it made me independent. By my late 20s, I was doing very well financially. I lived modestly, invested aggressively, paid off my student loans early. I never told my family how much I made. They knew I worked with computers and that I was comfortable, but details felt dangerous. Every time my mom commented that I could afford to be more generous, I changed the subject. About 3.5 years ago, I was at my parents' house for Sunday dinner. This was back when I still showed up every week, still tried to be a good daughter. Something felt off from the moment I walked in. My dad looked exhausted, older somehow. My mom barely touched her food. After dinner, my dad asked if we could talk privately. He told me he'd been laid off from the manufacturing plant 6 months earlier. Unemployment had run out. My mom's part-time retail job barely covered groceries. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage and facing foreclosure. The number stuck in my head immediately. $8,000 to get current. Monthly payment? $1,950. I remember sitting there, doing the math in my head. I could afford it. It wouldn't be painless, but it was possible. I thought about everything they'd done for me growing up, the guilt that comes automatically when your parents look scared. So I said yes. I offered to cover the back payments and take over the mortgage temporarily until my dad found work. But I had one condition. No one can know, I said, especially Ethan. I didn't want this to turn into a spectacle. I didn't want praise or resentment or my parents feeling ashamed. I didn't want Ethan to feel entitled to my money, or worse, like I was showing off. They agreed immediately, too immediately, in hindsight. I wired the $8,000 the next day. Then I set up an automatic transfer, $1,850 on the first of every month, straight to their mortgage. At first, my dad kept me updated on his job search. He was in his early 60s. Finding work wasn't easy. Months passed, then a year. Eventually, he found a job, but it paid far less than before. They still couldn't afford the mortgage. So I kept paying. 1 year turned into 2, 2 turned into 3. By the end of the 3rd year, I'd paid $66,600 in monthly payments, plus the initial $8,000. Nearly $75,000 total. And not once did they sit me down and say thank you. Not once did they talk about taking the payments back over. It just became normal. Meanwhile, this is what I heard at family gatherings. You know, Ethan and Lauren could really use help with the kids. It must be nice to be single with no responsibilities. Some people don't really understand what it means to sacrifice for family. That last one came from my mother at Thanksgiving, while I was actively paying their mortgage. I remember gripping my fork so tightly my knuckles went white. I kept my mouth shut. I'd promised to keep this private, and I did, even when it hurt. My relationship with Ethan was complicated. We weren't close, but we weren't openly hostile either. Polite, distant. We lived separate lives. He worked retail management, making about $45,000 a year. Lauren worked part-time as a receptionist. They struggled financially. 2 kids in a small apartment will do that, and my mom made sure I knew every detail. Their car broke down. One of the kids needed medication. Daycare was expensive. Saving for a house felt impossible. Every story came with a meaningful pause, like I was supposed to volunteer a solution. I helped when it felt reasonable. Christmas gifts for the kids, cash here and there. I paid for their car repair once, 200, without making a big deal of it. But I refused to become everyone's personal ATM while secretly keeping my parents from losing their home. Around this time, I started dating Daniel. He noticed things I tried to ignore, the tension in my shoulders after family dinners, the way I always defended my parents even when they cut me down. "They don't treat you fairly," he said once. I brushed it off. "They're just old school." But 6 months ago, everything shifted. Ethan and Lauren started house hunting. They found a 4-bedroom in a good school district, perfect for the kids. They were pre-approved, but short on the down payment. I heard about that house constantly. "They're so close, May. This would be life-changing for the kids. It's such a shame when family can't help each other." The pressure was relentless. Finally, I said no. "I can't help with the down payment," I told my mom. "I have my own financial goals." Her response was instant. "That's exactly what I expected. You've always been more focused on yourself." I almost told her everything right then. I didn't. I thought, naively, that eventually we'd talk, that once things stabilized, the truth would come out. I didn't know they were already telling a different story, and I had no idea how badly it was about to blow up. If you've never been the convenient child, it's hard to explain how it feels. Not the golden child, not the problem child, the convenient one. The one they call when the car breaks down, the mortgage is late, the roof leaks, or someone needs just a little help. The one who gets praised in private, briefly, awkwardly, but criticized in public so no one expects too much gratitude to go your way. That was me. And for 3 years, I let it happen because I kept telling myself the same lie. They're my parents. They must love me. They're just stressed. But stress doesn't make you rewrite someone's character. Stress doesn't make you turn your daughter into a villain in front of an audience. The months after I refused to help Ethan with his down payment were the ugliest I'd ever seen my mom. She didn't scream. She didn't pick a fight outright. She did something worse. She went quiet in that pointed, theatrical way that said, "I'm disappointed in you," without having to say it. Then she started accidentally dropping comments into conversations like pebbles in a pond, watching the ripples spread. When you have kids, you understand sacrifice. Some people only think about themselves because they don't have anyone depending on them. It must be nice to build a life where you're the only priority. I heard it at a cousin's baby shower, at a Sunday dinner, even once at my aunt's birthday when my mother leaned across the table, smiling sweetly, and said, "May just isn't the nurturing type. She's always been career-oriented." Career-oriented, like it was a flaw. And every time I said nothing. Because if I spoke up, I'd have to admit what I was doing behind the scenes. I'd have to say, "I've paid your mortgage for 3 years while you insult me at parties." I couldn't bring myself to destroy their pride, even as they slowly destroyed my reputation. Daniel saw it more clearly than I did. We'd get home from family events, and I'd peel my coat off like it weighed 100 pounds. I'd stand in the kitchen, staring at nothing, replaying little sentences in my head like they were needles. Daniel would watch me quietly for a moment, then say, "They're punishing you." I'd laugh it off, too sharp, too fast. "No, they're just worried about Ethan." "May," he'd say, lowering his voice, "it's not worry, it's manipulation." I wanted to believe he was wrong, because if he was right, then everything I'd done, every payment, every sacrifice, every bite of my tongue wasn't love. It was training, conditioning. And I wasn't ready to admit I'd been trained. Then came the dinner that finally cracked the glass. My mom called and said we were having a family dinner to celebrate Ethan and Lauren. They were closing on their house in a few days. I remember standing in my apartment, phone pressed to my ear, feeling this dull, sour resistance rise in my chest. "Do I have to?" I mouthed to Daniel. He didn't answer out loud. He just looked at me with that calm, steady expression that always made me feel seen. He came closer and placed his hand lightly at the small of my back. "You don't have to do anything," he said quietly when I hung up. "But if you go, go for you, not for them." So I went. I even brought a gift, a nice set of kitchen knives, $200, a housewarming present that felt safe because it wasn't cash. It wasn't something my mother could twist into a narrative about me finally helping. When I walked into my parents' house, the energy hit me immediately. Everyone was there: aunts, uncles, cousins. The living room packed with bodies and laughter and the warm smell of food. My mom was glowing, actually glowing, like this night was her own personal victory. Ethan was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with the relaxed confidence of someone who has never had to fight for approval. Lauren was holding the baby on her hips, smiling politely. She always looked slightly nervous around my family, like she could sense the undercurrents but didn't know how deep they ran. "May," my mom called loudly, her voice sweet as syrup. "There you are." I leaned in for the hug she offered, felt her hands pat my back like a performance, a show for the room. "Hi, Mom," I said. "Ethan, look who finally made time for us," she added with a laugh that made my skin prickle. Daniel's words echoed in my head. "They're punishing you." I forced a smile and walked into the kitchen to give Ethan the gift. "Congrats," I said, handing him the wrapped box. He looked pleasantly surprised. "Oh, wow. Thanks, May." Lauren's eyes softened. "That's really thoughtful," she said. And for a second, just a second, I felt something close to normal. Like maybe I could still have a decent relationship with them if I kept things small and polite. Then we sat down to eat. Dinner was loud, chaotic. Everyone talking at once. My aunt kept making jokes about how Ethan would finally have space for the kids to run around. My mom kept saying, "Our grandchildren," like she owned them. My dad laughed along, quieter than usual, drinking more than he normally did. I watched him closely. His hand shook slightly as he lifted his glass. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Something was wrong, but I couldn't place it yet. Halfway through the meal, my dad stood up and clinked his fork against his glass. The room quieted. Ethan and Lauren turned toward him, faces bright with expectation. My dad cleared his throat. "I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. This is a big moment for Ethan and Lauren." My mom dabbed at her eye dramatically, already tearing up. My dad continued, "We're so proud of you both. Buying a home, especially with 2 little ones, that's huge. That's something you'll build a future on." I lifted my own glass, smiling automatically, assuming this was just a normal toast. Then he said it. "It wasn't easy," he announced, "but your mom and I scraped together everything we could to help make this happen. We gave Ethan and Lauren $36,000 for the down payment." For a moment, I honestly thought I'd misheard. 36,000. The number hung in the air like a gunshot. I felt my throat close, my brain stuttered, trying to make the math make sense. My parents. The parents whose mortgage I'd been paying. The parents who had come to me panicked and desperate, swearing they were drowning. They had $36,000. The room erupted in applause. My mom beamed like she'd just been crowned. "That's what family does," my dad said, voice thick with emotion. "We take care of our own." The words hit me like a slap. My hands were still around my glass, but I couldn't feel them. Ethan looked stunned, delighted. He turned toward my parents, eyes shining. "Are you serious? Dad? Mom?" Lauren's mouth opened, then closed. Her expression flickered, surprise, gratitude, and something else. Uncertainty. Like she could sense the story didn't add up. My mom nodded proudly. "We sacrificed," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We saved for months, cut back, did without, because that's what you do when you love your children." When you love your children. I tasted something metallic in my mouth. I heard my own voice before I realized I was speaking. "Where did you get $36,000? The room quieted again, this time not with celebratory hush, but with startled tension. My dad's face tightened. We'd been saving," he said vaguely. Saving. I stared at him. I stared at my mom. They couldn't even meet my eyes. And in that instant, the truth rose in me, not fully formed yet, but undeniable. Whatever this money was, it wasn't theirs. Or at least it wasn't earned the way they were pretending. My mom's smile sharpened. "Some of us know how to put family first," she said, her gaze landing on me like a pointed accusation. "Some of us understand what sacrifice really means." The room was silent. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, not understanding why the air had turned cold. Lauren looked between us, suddenly tense. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. Because my mother had just said the word, sacrifice, while I had been quietly bleeding money into their mortgage for 36 straight months. And they were standing there, acting like saints. I pushed my chair back slowly. I have an early morning," I said, voice tight. "Work." No one tried to stop me. My mom didn't even look concerned. She just nodded, like my departure was proof of something. "Of course May is leaving early. May only cares about herself." I walked out into the cold night air, my hands shaking as I fumbled my keys. In the car, Daniel called. "How's it going?" he asked softly. I didn't answer right away. I sat there staring at my parents' warmly lit windows, at the silhouettes moving inside like nothing had just shattered. Then I whispered, "They gave Ethan $36,000. There was a pause. Then Daniel's voice went very still. "May, where did they get that?" "I don't know," I said, my throat raw, "but I'm going to find out." I drove home in a fog, and that night at 2:12 a.m., I opened my laptop, logged into my bank accounts, and began pulling every record of every payment I'd ever sent them. Because something inside me finally snapped. Not into grief, into focus. And once I started digging, I found something that made my blood turn to ice. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, the glow of the screen reflecting off a mug of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside. I pulled up my bank statements first. Month by month, year by year. There it was, lined up in brutal, undeniable order. $1,850 transferred on the first of every month. 36 times, plus the initial $8,000 lump sum. I opened a spreadsheet and started adding. 10 months, 20, 30. When I reached the end, my chest tightened. 74 now. That was how much I'd paid to keep my parents in their home, how much I'd quietly given up. Trips I didn't take, investments I delayed, a down payment I could have put toward my own place. $74,600. I leaned back in my chair and pressed my palms into my eyes, trying to breathe through the pressure building behind them. And then I asked the question that refused to leave my mind. How did they have $36,000? Because it wasn't possible, not on their income, not while I was covering their biggest expense. So I kept digging. Public records are a funny thing. People assume their finances are private, but houses leave trails, loans leave fingerprints. It didn't take long. 6 months earlier, my parents had taken out a home equity line of credit. Amount $50,000. I stared at the screen, my pulse roaring in my ears. They hadn't saved. They hadn't sacrificed. They'd borrowed against their house, the same house I'd kept from foreclosure, the same house whose equity existed because I'd been paying the mortgage for 3 years. They used my money to keep themselves afloat, so they could leverage debt and hand Ethan a check. And then they stood in front of the family and called it sacrifice. I felt sick. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind of sick. The quiet, hollow kind that settles in your stomach when something finally makes sense, and you wish it didn't. They hadn't just taken my money. They'd taken my silence and used it to destroy my reputation. Every comment about me being selfish, every insinuation that I didn't help, every look that suggested I didn't understand real family values. It wasn't ignorance. It was strategy. I closed the laptop and sat there in the dark as dawn crept through the window. Something inside me shifted, not into rage, not yet, but into clarity. For years, I'd been carrying guilt that was never mine. Guilt for not giving enough. Guilt for not being softer. Guilt for building a life that didn't revolve around children and obligation. And suddenly all of it evaporated. I called my financial advisor, Mark, the next morning. He'd been working with me for 5 years. He knew I helped my parents a bit. He didn't know how much. I told him everything. The mortgage, the secrecy, the HELOC, the public humiliation. There was a long pause on the line when I finished. "May," he said finally, "that's financial abuse." The words landed hard. "They manipulated you emotionally," he continued, "to extract money from you while actively damaging your standing in the family. And they did it knowingly." I swallowed. "What are my options?" "Legally, you could sue for the full amount," he said. "You have documentation. The lack of a written agreement actually helps you. It shows there was no repayment plan, but that's the nuclear option." I already knew that. "What would you do?" I asked. Another pause. "Give them one chance to make it right. One. If they refuse, then you protect yourself." That afternoon, I called Sarah, a lawyer friend from college. She didn't sugarcoat it. "They used you," she said flatly, "and if this goes to court, the paper trail is ugly for them." She offered to draft a formal loan agreement and attend a meeting if things got heated. That word stuck with me. Meeting. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to ambush them at a holiday or explode at a dinner table. If they were going to be exposed, it would be calmly, clinically, with receipts. Over the next 2 days, I went deeper. I pulled tax records, income estimates, social media posts. That's when I saw the vacation photos. 8 months earlier, Mexico, beach resorts, cocktails with umbrellas, sunset dinners captioned with "so grateful for this time together." I remembered wiring $1,850 that same month, assuming they were scraping by. The anger that came then wasn't hot. It was cold, precise. I printed everything: bank statements, HELOC records, property filings, timeline summaries. I stacked them neatly into a folder. Then I made the call. "Mom," I said when she answered, keeping my voice neutral, "we need to have a family meeting." Her silence told me everything. "A meeting?" she repeated. "Is everything okay?" "We need to talk about finances," I said. "Everyone needs to be there. You, Dad, and Ethan." There was a beat. Then, carefully, "Ethan's very busy with the house." "He needs to be there," I said. "This involves him." Another pause. Then, reluctantly, "Okay, Sunday dinner." I hung up and exhaled slowly. Daniel watched me from the couch, concern etched into his face. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. "I'm done being confused." Sunday came faster than I expected. When I walked into my parents' living room, the atmosphere was tense. My mom's smile was brittle. My dad wouldn't meet my eyes. Ethan was in the kitchen, laughing with Lauren, completely unaware that the story he'd been handed was about to collapse. I asked Lauren if she could take the kids into the other room. "This is an adult conversation," I said gently. She hesitated, but nodded. Once we were seated, I placed the folder on the coffee table between us. "I want to talk about money," I said. My mother's face went pale. My father stared at his hands. Ethan looked confused. "What's going on?" I opened the folder. "Specifically," I continued, my voice steady, "I want to talk about the $74,600 I've given you over the past 3 years." The room went dead silent, and in that silence, I knew. There was no going back. My mother's face drained of color so fast it was almost frightening. My father suddenly found the pattern in the carpet fascinating. Ethan looked between us, his confusion deepening by the second. "May, what are you talking about?" I slid the first stack of papers across the coffee table. 3.5 years ago, I said evenly, Mom and Dad told me they were about to lose this house. Dad had been laid off. You were still in your apartment starting your family. They asked me to help, privately. I laid out the bank statements one after another, like cards in a slow, merciless game. I paid the $8,000 they were behind. Then I paid $1,850 every month after that, for 36 months. Ethan picked one up, eyes scanning the numbers, his brow furrowed, then his mouth fell open. He looked up sharply. "This is real?" "Yes," I said. "Every transfer is documented." My mother finally found her voice. "May, this isn't—" "I'm not finished," I said, not raising my voice, but letting steel settle into it. I turned to my parents. "You asked me to keep this secret. You said you didn't want anyone knowing you were struggling." "So I did. I kept paying. Even while you told people I was selfish. Even while you said I didn't help family." My mom's eyes filled instantly. The tears came right on cue. "That's not fair," she whispered. "We never meant—" I pulled out the next document and slid it forward. "A home equity line of credit, $50,000, taken out 6 months ago." My dad flinched. "You borrowed against the house I was paying for," I continued. "Then you used that borrowed money to give Ethan $36,000. Ethan pushed the papers away like they burned. "You didn't tell me this," he said, his voice tight. "You never told me May was paying your mortgage." Of course they didn't, I thought. My mom shook her head rapidly. "We were under so much pressure. You stood up in front of the family," I cut in, "and talked about your sacrifice, about how you saved, about how that's what family does." I took a breath, all while taking my money every single month. The room was silent, except for my mother's sniffles. "I'm done paying the mortgage," I said, effective immediately. My dad looked up, panic flashing across his face. "May, you can't just—" "You're making almost $90,000 a year between the two of you," I said calmly. "You can afford it. You just didn't want to." "We used most of that money to help Ethan," my dad muttered. "Then that was your choice," I said, "and now you deal with it." My mother straightened, tears drying instantly into indignation. "After everything we've done for you?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. "You mean raising me? That's not a favor. That's a responsibility." Her mouth opened, closed. "I'm also going to need you to pay me back," I continued. "Not all at once, but we're formalizing this." I slid the drafted agreement across the table. "You have 7 days to agree to repayment terms through my lawyer, or I pursue legal options." "You'd sue your own parents?" my mother shrieked. "You took $75,000 from me under false pretenses," I replied. "What did you expect would happen?" Ethan finally spoke again. His voice was low. "May, I didn't know. If I had—" "I believe you," I said, meeting his eyes. "This isn't about you. It's about them." I stood, gathering my papers. I'm done being the family ATM. I'm done being humiliated while funding your lives. My mother started crying again, loud this time. I didn't stay to watch. Outside, Ethan followed me. Wait, he said. I really didn't know. Mom always said you didn't want to help. I nodded. I know. He swallowed hard. I should have defended you. Maybe, I said gently, but now you know. My phone exploded with messages that night. Aunts, uncles, cousins. I blocked most of them. The rest got one message. I paid their mortgage for 3 years while they told everyone I was selfish. They went quiet fast. My parents signed the agreement on day 6. They barely made their first payment, but they made it. They sold the house 3 months later. I bought my own place. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I hadn't even realized I was missing. Peace,